Let me welcome you all for the panel discussion on making net zero real. We know now that climate change is real. We don't need to discuss that anymore. Tackling climate change requires getting to net zero, and that is getting more and more established. The path to net zero, however, is not easy, and a lot of obstacles must be overcome. That is why conversations on making net zero real is the need of the hour. The moderator for today's conversation is Mr. Siddharth Sharma, Group Chief Sustainability Officer, Tata Sons, and joining him in the conversation will be Mr. Sunil Mathur, Managing Director and CEO of Siemens Limited, Mr. Nilesh Shah, Senior Vice President, Bombay Chamber and Group President and MD, Kotak Mahindra AMC, V.S. Parthasarathy, coach, mentor and entrepreneur, formerly Group Chief Financial Officer and President of the Mahindra Group and member of the Group Executive Board, Mr. Rajiv Anand, Deputy Managing Director, Designate, Axis Bank, Mr. Mathur, Mr. Shah, Mr. Parthasarathy, Mr. Anand, welcome to the conversation. Over to you, Mr. Sharma.
Thank you, Anirban, and welcome to all the panelists today. I think it's my pleasure to be moderating a discussion as important as this, because we are talking about making COP26 real. And we have about 45 minutes, and I have some conversation points that I intend to ask our panelists. So I'll try and see that if there are any questions, please kind of put them in the chat box. If we are able to take them, if we have the time, we definitely will. Otherwise, address them to whichever panelist you want, and we will try and get back to you on the responses. And let me begin with the big question, because when India went into COP26, I think a lot of on the policy side, we were looking at climate finance, and we were not looking at making an announcement, because up till now, India has not made announcements about an intention to go net zero by a particular date. Now, the Prime Minister, of course, made a very bold and a very ambitious statement, a set of statement which comprised 5 elements, where he went into the long range, which was 2070 carbon neutrality, and then he also had intermediate targets for the country as a whole. And I think I would like to start with Sunil. In terms of that, looking at this very ambitious broad sweep that the Prime Minister has made, also given the fact that India historically has been responsible for only 4% of the emissions, with 17% of the population, do you really think, Sunil, that it's something achievable, it's something that we'll be able to do, or is it something that we have bitten off more than we can chew?
So thank you, Siddharth, and it's really a pleasure to be here at such a critical time in history, particularly when one looks at the entire story of decarbonization. I do believe, Siddharth, answering your question specifically, I do believe that the target of 2070 is realistic. I think the bigger challenge, though, is meeting the targets of 2030 and the milestones over there. And you mentioned rightly that we are only 4% of the global carbon footprint there. But I think it is really critical for each one of us to play our role in this. As we grow, we will need more energy. As we grow, our carbon footprint will grow. And we need to be very, very careful how we actually grow, whether we can do it in a sustainable manner and really be a part of the global citizenship over here and play our role, because this is an imperative. And I think it is important for each one of us to recognize that this is not really an issue of which country or which economy for that matter, but it is something where each one of us will have to play our role, be it government, be it civil society, be it industry in totality. So I think we will have to break this down into smaller bite-sized chunks over here and not look necessarily only at the long-term strategy, but really work backwards from there and say, what is the maximum that we should do? Not what we believe we can do, but how much can we stretch ourselves to really, in all three spheres, government, civil society, and industry, to really start making an impact on this. And there's a lot that can be done here. I'll stop there, Siddharth, but I really believe that the 2070 targets are achievable, but we need to get bite-sized chunks and get really real about the 2030 targets.
Thank you, Sunil. I think there's, and before I proceed and I kind of join the conversation in with you and others again, I would request, because this is a pure conversational play that we are having, any one of you has any comments to make on what Sunil has said, please feel free to come in. And I would just kind of say that, India, we have not at the moment, of course, this is the big vision. This is the goal that the Prime Minister has announced, and we'll have to see how the government proceeds forward in terms of the strategies and the implementation path. But for me, a point where we need to really apply our mind is that there are multitudes of people here who we are lifting out of poverty. We have our developmental needs. There is going to be reliance on fossil fuels. We are nowhere close to peaking. And, so therefore, that represents a big challenge as we move ahead. That how do you cater to your developmental requirements while at the time you grow sustainably? And Partha, may I ask you to come in and throw some light on that?
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here on this panel. And in a sense, I'm at that cusp where it's easy. On one side, I'm not part of the corporate, and the other side, I'm not part of any sector per se. So it kind of becomes philosophical to some extent. So going back to what Sunil said and kind of building on it, if you ask that, have we beaten more than what we say, is that it's almost like the dialogue from Sholay. Ab bol hi diya to dekh lenge. So I think it is also required, that kind of passion is required from this country. Yeah, because we have to surpass ourselves in order to give a better future for the next generations to come. And I think that's a reasonable alternative. The next thing is that if we kind of look at what we are doing, you have a vision or a dream and then you do some action. Then go and say, I have a right to have this dream and a bigger dream, and therefore we do. And as we did what we did in the solar sphere gives us a right to have this dream. And now we will have to, like Sunil said, break it up. I just wanted to give one example in the social sector, and then I will go back to come back and answer more question. I was working with the SEVA, which is a self-employed women's association, a 50-year-old organization, and we're trying to say, how do we make rural green? And we said, listen, we want to think about biogas, green coal, solar electricity, solar pump, waste to energy, clean water, village processing centers, and so on. So everything which will kind of say the ecosystem starts to come in as an urban area, and therefore you can bring down the whole carbon footprint dramatically from whatever it is. In the salt pan, as I drove down, which is only consisting of the Chota Ran of Kutch, now I see 70% of the salt pans are worked by solar water pumps and solar powered things, right? This is a big change, where last time when I went, it was 70% diesel pumps. So the entire ecosystem has completely changed. So, and the other one is farm to fork, where they have said farm to fork is not rural to urban. It's not going to the dinner table plate in an urban setup, but it's rural to rural, farm to fork. So, and I think by doing smaller supply chains, we are already seeing Do we have everything everywhere? The answer is no. We have some of this in many places, many of them together in some places, and all of them maybe in one place more as a work in progress. But this is the future state of things to come, Siddharth. And therefore, if we do things like that in every sphere that we talk, then we can have, these targets maybe surpassed, not quite met.
Siddharth, I think if I can jump in there.
Please, Rajiv, please.
I think, the point that you made and the point that Partha is making as well, there is no need for us to look at sustainability and development as mutually exclusive. What is actually going to happen is that significant direct and economic gains through these climate actions are going to happen. Millions of new jobs are going to get created in sunrise industries. Resource efficiency, energy consumption efficiencies are going to kick in. So as we think about ROI of sustainability, I think we should certainly take some of these into consideration as well. So I think the whole narrative that sustainability is at the cost of development, I think to my mind is a bit flawed.
No, I completely agree with you, because it can't be seen as a binary.
Yeah.
And I think the other point that I always raise when we talk about sustainability is that you also have to weigh the cost of taking action vis-a-vis the cost of not taking action.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because you see, one of the things I was just seeing that I read a very interesting article which talked about the fact that, between India, China, and Japan, in 2020, the economic losses on account of natural disasters were $487 billion. Now, the cost of not reacting to the impacts of climate change are things that we have to factor in. And so we always say that it's high time that when you are framing strategy for organizations, sustainability has to be at the core. And sustainability or profitability and sustainability and development at the macro level cannot be seen as exclusive in nature. So I think that's a very valid point that you make, Rajiv.
Siddharth, can I also come in on a little bit on the point that you made? If you go back a little back, and maybe go back maybe 20 years or maybe 30 years, you would say quality or cost. Yeah, it is no more even debated its quality or cost. It is inherently assumed that better quality with cost consciousness, right? So both of them, it is the and economy. Now, the same thing has to follow in the sustainability and development area. And Rajiv is in a sense kind of, said that. And that's what you're also mentioning, Siddharth. And that's what we have to build in. It cannot be a separate thing that we first destroy and then start to somehow make amends. Now we have to say, how do we inbuild that we will not destroy as we grow? And I think that's the new, that's when, when I start green coal, I started laughing when somebody gave me this concept. This is saying green coal means what? Coal is always carbon and green coal is zero carbon. So how do we start to use that in a production and therefore avoid mining coal to the extent that it's being used here. So just to build on what both of you said.
And I think, Partha, the issue over there, particularly with regard to the point that you made, Siddharth, about the cost of not doing it. Let's take a very clear example here in India. Cities create a huge amount of waste. This waste is piled up outside the cities and you get mountains of it. You get a whole lot of pollution coming out because it's continuously being burnt there. You have health-related issues there and so on. But there are technologies now that convert waste to energy. And the question really is, we've got to be examining the entire concept of waste to energy from a completely different angle. The total cost of that is not going to be the same as the cost of a conventional coal-fired power plant. And I think these are costs that we've got to start appreciating, that there is a cost of hygiene, there is a cost of healthcare, there is a cost of space for the waste and collection, etc., etc. And we've got to start evaluating the end-to-end costs over there, because it is possible to eliminate waste in the country, eliminate the entire pollution impacts of that, if we use technology, and for that, innovation is critical. Making it affordable is step two. If we are able to get the technology in place and then make it affordable, that is when we will have hit the jackpot.
That's right, Sunil. I mean, that's very well put. Let me now raise another issue before we, which is, of course, and which was something which was actually driving a group of nations, developing nations. It was really a divide between the global north and the global south at COP26, and which has been agitating minds, which is about climate finance. And the fact that the developed nations have not even till date been able to make to meet a commitment of $100 billion of climate finance a year. And I think of all the informed commentary that was coming out of the Prime Minister's commitment, one was that, of course, the $100 billion is actually a floor, obviously, and all the bold ambitions that India has taken in the intermediate and the long term will, of course, be contingent upon the availability of climate financing. And in another set of papers, I read articles that the total cost of financing India's transition to net zero by 2070 will be in the range of about $10 trillion. And there is going to be, as of now, an unmet requirement of $3.5 trillion. Now, given that Nilesh is here, and this, as I said when I began, is a panel which is very, very high on finance, I'd like to know that how is it that we are able to finance this transition, and the role of, the overall policy framework in the financial sector, both within India and globally. So whether it is the multilateral development banks, whether it is the developmental financial institutions, whether it is the allocative efficiency of the capital markets, all these elements, how do they come together, Nilesh? How do you kind of put it in a cogent framework? And how do we make sure that as we move forward, we are able to fund this transition?
So if we look at India's savings right now, on a $3 trillion economy, at about 30%, we will be saving close to $1 trillion. So to generate $10 trillion of investments from here till 2070 is definitely within our means. However, we should be allowing market to finance this transition rather than going back to the allocation model. If we go back to Kyoto Protocol, under that protocol, companies which were producing refrigerated gases, which were depleting ozone layer, they were incentivized to move to CFC gases, and in order to do the transition, they were provided certain credits. One of the company in India, Gujarat Fluorochemicals, probably earned close to 1,000 crore by selling their carbon credit, and there was a very, very positive incentive for making that transition. So as India, we should leverage the fact that historically we haven't contributed to carbon creation as development. Even in present circumstances, with 17% population, we are creating or contributing to about 4% of emission. Hence, there should be a mechanism like carbon credit where countries which are contributing more compared to their per capita need should be compensating developing markets. The second thing which we should position is India in ESG space. We know global capital today is searching for eligible companies under ESG. Both China actually boycotted COP26, so it's quite likely that global capital from ESG point of view will be a bit circumspect about them. Brazil and South Africa, though they participated over there, they refused to make any commitment towards net zero. India has taken lead over there, and now it is up to Indian companies to attract global capital under the overall aegis of net zero by 2070. The final thing which is very, very critical is our own allocation of savings. While Indians are very good savers, they are not necessarily good investors. A lot of our savings goes into real estate, gold, kind of physical assets. How do we ensure that the sustainability financing becomes equally rewarding for investors? How do we bring them to domestic investors? What kind of tax incentive governments give to popularize them? That will all be extremely critical to ensure that domestic retail savings also flow towards financing of sustainability. Overall, my feeling is that today it's very difficult to envisage what kind of financing will be required for this transition. But if we allow market forces to operate, I'm sure they will be able to figure out an optimum methods of financing across debt, equity, mezzanine, and other structures.
Thank you, Nilesh. I mean, but just one question I had, because if you see the way, of course, if you look at renewables, particularly solar, the way the cost curve has changed over the last decade or so. And if you now look at some of the technologies which we are talking about and which will be very important in so far as the hard-to-abate sectors are concerned, whether it's steel or anyone else, this is technologies like green hydrogen, carbon capture, utilization and storage, etc. There are other nascent technologies which are still there. Now, capital has to come in, but then there's also this thing that, one, there is an emerging market risk when you are investing in emerging markets, including India. So when a financial manager is looking at it, there's an emerging market risk. And on top of that emerging market risk is superimposed the risk of technologies which are still not commercially proven, which are still very nascent. So how do you create the right policy framework and the right incentive structure to attract capital in the light of these elements?
So essentially, Siddharth, if we allow market forces to operate, they will be able to create innovative structures. Today, many concepts which are loss-making in nature, which does not seem to have path to profitability, are able to raise capital. They are able to raise capital based on concepts from high-risk investors. In India, essentially, we have very limited deciphering of risk. Either there is debt secured or there is equity. But between debt and equity, the kind of mezzanine structures which we have to create, they are fairly limited. If we open up our markets for innovations and improvements, I'm sure we will be able to raise necessary risk capital for setting up of technology, for commercialization of technology. And eventually, once those technology stabilizes, we will be able to fund it with appropriate debt structure. The whole need for the sustainability financing will be creating layers of risk where one set of investors who are happy with lower return will get much higher safety, and one set of investors who are willing to take risk will have to also benefit from the higher return if the product takes off. The other important thing will be also democratization of risk. We have seen many large companies getting funded through IPO market where millions of investors came together to share the risk. Now, if people can come together to share commercial risk, I'm sure they'll be more than happy to come together to create a sustainable future. How do we allow market forces to operate? How do we deepen our capital market so that risk can be layered? How do we create appropriate incentivization through taxation, through ease of doing investment, so that local and global investors all come together for financing our needs?
Thank you, Nilesh. I think that's very well put. Rajiv, would you like to add to what Nilesh has said?
Yeah, thanks, Siddharth. Glasgow also saw a significant scale-up of private finance commitments from financial institutions who basically control or manage trillions of dollars. The large black rocks of the world have come together to commit. So in that sense, the amount of money that is coming into ESG funds is literally billions of dollars on a yearly basis. So to my mind, I'm already seeing various conversations from investors on seeing how they can. In fact, they are seeking out opportunities to be able to channelize money into ESG, and there are the likes of IFC Washington who are talking to us to see how they can provide us funding so that we in turn are able to fund ESG related projects and so on and so forth. Axis Bank itself um, has committed to double its green book over the next 5 years. I mean, not into 2020, 2070. Most of us won't be here, but we're taking 5-year targets. So in that sense, my own feeling is that availability of money is not a problem. What I'm actually a bit worried about is the narrative that coal is bad and everything other than coal is good. I think it is really a transition that we are playing out, and what we are actually looking for is transition finance. And so therefore, yes, in a country like India, even in 2070, 50% of our requirements will still be coal. And so therefore, to that extent, we've got to think of this as transition. We've got to push various polluting industries to be able to manage their pollution in a more effective manner. But to shut down financing to some of these dirty sectors, which is what is actually happening today, I think is a very, very dangerous proposition at this point in time, because it goes back to the point that you made, that in a country which is going to grow 7-8% over the next so many years, we will need power, and a certain part of that power will come from coal. And if you're going to shut down financing to that part, it's going to get difficult. For example, today, Siddharth, if anybody comes to us as a bank to set up a new thermal plant, he will not get money from us. It's as simple as that. So incrementally, everything is going into renewable and so on and so forth. And finally, to the point that you made about costs, let me just sort of put it out there that Axis Bank actually did India's first sustainable AT1 bond in the global markets. 40% of that was from ESG linked funds, and the pricing that we got was the tightest pricing that any bond got for that equivalent rating across the world. So I don't think that there is a emerging market overlay for good companies, good projects, and it's not just us. There are various entities who have been able to raise money very tightly for ESG like projects in this country. So my own feeling is money is not a problem. I think if we get our regulations right, if we get our policies right, and we've got Indian entrepreneurship to back all that, I think getting money at a reasonable price, I don't think is a problem. But I only worry about the transition that we've got to play through, and we've got to play that a bit carefully.
So I think
maybe just to add on to Rajiv's point there, this will be a transition. You can't switch on, as Rajiv mentioned, switch on and switch off. And that transition will take its time. The question is, how can we speeden up that transition? And what is it that we need to do to encourage that transition to happen much quicker? There are technologies in place, for example, that will use less coal and give a greater output. Now, can we, as we transition there, can we start incentivizing that plants, for example, start doing that? You can't switch off a plant, but you can force a plant to use less coal and produce greater output there. There are technologies out there that use the waste heat out of the plants, for example. So they become much more efficient over there. Can we incentivize and provide greater financing options for plants to go towards that as the next level? Because you can't switch on, and renewables, solar and wind is not going to answer everything immediately. There's a whole infrastructure around it that is going to need to have to come up. before you can start getting solar and wind. Just to put that point in perspective, we put on our factory, covered every single roof of our factory with solar panels. At the end of it, it only covered 15% of our requirement. There was not enough room on the factory roof to absorb more panels. And those are realistic issues where, you have companies, and of course industry uses the largest amount of electricity, and motors use the largest amount of that within industry. But effectively, we've got to find this transition and find this route to transition so that companies and organizations that really want to go there are actually helped in that transitionary process. It's just not practical to say rooftop solar is going to solve our problems. It's not. We need the entire environment around it. As you transition to renewables, your grids get unstable because of different times. You'll need to start strengthening grids there. So it's a whole ecosystem that needs to come together. But we've got to start taking very clear steps right now, which will include financing options, which will include incentivization from the government to help us move across that growth curve very, very quickly.
I think that's a point well taken. And as someone who's been in government myself for a long period of time, sorry, Partha, please go ahead.
Yeah, you finish what you're saying and then
So what I was saying is that the role of the government in framing policy and regulation, because especially, this is a discussion sometimes I have with my colleagues, MDs and CEOs of our operating companies. India being the kind of cost-conscious nation that we are, and the fact that if a company solely has to move forward on bearing the costs of the transition, it may well be pushed out of the market because the ultimate consumer cannot pay that kind of green premium that would be required for that particular product. And therefore, there is a need to create a level playing field. And that's where, the question of technology, policy regulation by government, so everybody moves. The thing is that either everyone moves or no one moves. And this is really true in the hard to abate sectors. So I just wanted to have a view of the panel on, government coming in and making the regulations. If you see the EU, again, there is a legislation. A lot of countries have legislation which mandates, reaching net zero by a certain date. And that then pushes you forward and that levelizes the playing field. So I just thought I would just raise this issue to the panel and get your inputs on this. But Partha, before that, yes.
Yeah, maybe it's answer to both. I was kind of building on and maybe it answers part of your question as well. So I'll connect it. So as Sunil was saying, and even Siddharth, you were saying, basically we need an incentive framework. So let's take about the solar. When it was 16 rupees, so still there was needed to be at some time that being supported by some incentive framework. And over a period of time now you see that the cost has evened out or even better than what even the traditional power can give. Now, therefore, a policy framework for adoption of this technology is a real thing. The next one is, let's take mobility, which is the other place where a huge amount of emissions happen. So if you're saying electric vehicles at some point need some bit of incentivization and subsidy in a sense, and also better interest rates so that it becomes an even field with the fossil fuel. So now what has happened is from there we have come to a stage where three-wheelers are cost competitive with this. The four-wheelers have still not got exactly that, but three-wheelers have, and therefore now we can let them be on a market-driven force. But for some time, this kind of policy incentivization of sustainable outcome-based and low-carbon solutions, where they carry a premium by policy incentives, has to be a norm which we will have to build in. Just give you an example, continuing from the solar. Now there is, we have put solar, and if you have to put more solar, maybe we'll need 1.5 times of Singapore land mass to put the balance of the solar that we want to put, half of it. Now, if you have to move away from it, one of the things is floating solar, meaning put solar on water. And if you do that, it will have a little bit of different dimension. So a policy framework has to come to support that. Till again, that also comes on even keel. And then we have another option to kind of take the land mass, which is a premium now, and unburden it by saying water we already have, let's protect water as well as have floating solar. So I'm just giving a very specific example just to build on the point that we cannot walk away from there needing to have some policy framework, especially for low carbon and this premium. But we will have to kind of see that it comes to a stage and then it can start withdrawing, and then commercial forces can kind of take the center stage. But it is required till that time it is there. So which will immensely help a country like India.
Correct.
Siddharth, I would like to share the experience of pharma sector. When India got independence, we had product patents,
Right.
and all the multinational companies were the large manufacturers, distributor of pharma products. In the 60s, we realized that this model cannot work, and we went for process patents. Indian entrepreneurs quickly reverse engineered and started producing those medicines on which they didn't have to pay royalty. This worked very well till the 90s, but then India had to become part of the global system, and product patent in medicine was one of the most important requirements. As we liberalized, we needed to be part of the global economy. We needed to accept the global standards on product patents. But the government and the industry worked together with global bodies to ensure that there was a 20-year transition period. India moved from process patents to product patents on medicine. And during that transition period, Indian entrepreneurs not only invested in creating basic research, but also kind of creating the scale on the generic side. Today, we are the generic pharmacy to the world. We have taken basic steps in new drugs, while we still have a long distance to cover. But compared to the 50s and 60s, we have covered a long distance. And today, the world is looking towards India as one of the solution provider, whether it is related to vaccines or related to generics. The government and Indian industry and entrepreneur came together to create pharmaceutical base. I think there is valuable lessons on creating this transition to sustainability.
No, I think you are absolutely right, Nilesh, because the rise of the generic pharma industry and the manner in which we kind of reverse engineered and the whole thing of process patents, that's one reason why pharma was so affordable and continues to be affordable to 1.3 billion Indians. Had we been on product patents initially, it would probably have been a very different scenario. So I think it's been one of the big success stories and a lot of lessons to be learned from that. Now, I have just time for some quick closing comments, which I'll bring in later by each of the panelists. But one very interesting question, which is flashing in front of the Q&A box, and I thought I would just raise it to you. And I'm raising it to the general panel, and please feel free to comment. So how, in your opinion, would Indian corporates be able to meet the sudden surge in the demand of experienced sustainability professionals or skill sets? So obviously there's explosion right now, and there's the fear of missing out, and everybody suddenly wants to be, as I say, on the sustainability bandwagon, double inverted commas. And so therefore the question is saying, how do you ensure that there's a supply of professionals there in that space? And in the absence of right people in the right job, do you think we would be carrying a short-term risk 2030 of not going in the right direction? So I would like to come in on this, but you are the panelists, so I leave it open to all of you to kind of.
Siddharth, I can only comment from the perspective, I'm not quite sure what a professional ESG specialist is supposed to look like. Right? Realistically speaking, the entire sustainability chain, ESG, extends across the entire contribution that every industry should give back to society. And decarbonization is one of them, and that is technology. And for that, there are enough technology companies out there that can be reached out to. But then there's the entire area of social equity and giving back to society. And of course, there's the entire part of governance and ensuring that ethics in government and the way you run business is maintained. So I don't think you really need professionals for that. Ethics in governance is not about a professional there. It's about a value system that a company develops internally. The social part is really clear. What is it that you need to do to give back to society around you? And I don't think you need professionals for that either. So I think we've got enough right people who've got their heart in the right place. And that's what you need. You need a passion for sustainability. You need a passion for doing what's right. And the rest of it will all come together.
That's very well put, Sunil. I think I completely agree with you. But for the rest of the panelists, your take, if any, on what the questioner has asked.
Siddharth, one could use that argument for the lack of experienced fund managers or IT professionals or corporate bankers or engineers, for that matter, in this country, isn't it?
Correct.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Our telecom sector is a great example, right? When we started, what telecom experts did we have? When the
Correct. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it will come, and Sunil has summarized it very well. All I'm saying is we just do need some specialist input of the path less traveled by others who have traveled that path. But those are global specialists which can always come in. And in today's economy, with the kind of global village that we are in, it's very easy, and it is important for companies to bring that kind of inputs in, of path traveled and what they've seen. But rest of it, we have it. I mean, like HR is for business by business, ESG is for business and by business. So, it's not a separate function by itself. There's some expertise required, which central HR can bring in and central ESG can bring in.
I think it is clear a PhD in sustainability is not going to necessarily solve the problem. Sorry,
since
Nilesh.
Sorry.
Good. I'm done.
Since Partha didn't mention the Sole dialogue, I am quoting on his behalf. अगर बुराई ने बंदूक चलाना सिखा दिया तो अच्छा ही हल चलाना भी सिखा देगी.
Absolutely. I think, Nilesh, that's very well said, and I just add my two penny bit to this, which is to Vasudev, who's the questioner, that I think, as Sunil correctly said, it requires vision, it requires common sense, it requires a sense of leadership and buy-in. And once that leadership buy-in, whether at the company level or at the national level, is there, that vision is there, I think other things will start falling in place. There is no dearth of professionals in India on the technology side, and they will come in as the market expands. So it's not something which is a cause of concern for us. And we just now have about close to 4 minutes, and I would just like to leave it open to all four of you for your closing comments. So if there were two things that you had to suggest individually or as sectoral leaders to the government of India in transitioning to net zero by 2070, what would your two recommendations be? And starting with you, Sunil, and we will move clockwise on to all.
I would have preferred that Nilesh starts with that. He's more articulate in these things. But probably I would say the first one is define a clear roadmap. I think it is important to make visible what this roadmap is. We don't need a roadmap to 2070. We need a roadmap for the next 5 years, as Rajiv said, right? And then we need to deliver on that roadmap and then make a roadmap for the next 5 years. So that's the first thing. I think the second is we also then need to have a clear plan for implementation. And that involves incentives, that involves plans for financing, and that involves also technologies if required. So those are the two asks that I would put out there.
Thank you, Sunil. Rajiv, on to you.
I think as lenders, I'm actually quite comfortable in terms of the adoption of ESG practices among large corporate India. And we will continue to fine tune our risk frameworks to be able to align to the larger goals of the country, but at the same time ensure that we have a clean book as well going forward. But I think the one thing that we certainly should be looking at is India has about 6.8 crore MSMEs, and I think getting those 6.8 crore MSMEs aligned to this larger goal, to my mind, is very, very critical. They have various issues. They are not of appropriate scale. Their profit margins are not appropriate to take on some of the costs that this could potentially bring on. But I think here is where the large corporate India and the government needs to come together to be able to align these 6.8 crore MSMEs to the larger goal that we are all aiming towards.
Thanks, Rajiv. That's very well put. Yes. Partha, and after that,
the one is corporates for change. Basically, all of us have to come together. Individually, we may be able to accomplish some, but together we can accomplish a large. For example, if you learn to think about design or about green material, then steel, cement, many industries will have to come together, and therefore both corporates enabling it and government enabling this, coming together and doing this will be an important factor. Second thing is the policy has to be in terms of the underserved, not unserved but underserved. It will include MSME, but it will also include the rural population, which the access to capital is not that easy, and the 3% and 4% interest still prevails. Yeah, so that is where our major thing has to come in terms of policy intervention till they can stand on their own 2 feet, and therefore I would request government to focus on that. So these two areas.
Nilesh, over to you for the last word.
So apart from what Sunil, Rajiv and Partha mentioned, I will just say public-private partnership. When in space research you could get Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, we created ISRO. When in atomic research you can get Dr. Homi Bhabha, and both of them were from private sector but came to public life, and that public-private partnership laid the foundation for India's space and atomic research. Same way, if public-private partnership comes together, the best of the brains from private and public sector will be able to create this transition.
Thank you all. We are spot on time, and you've been a wonderful panel. Thanks, Sunil, Rajiv, Partha, and Nilesh for being here with me today. And I hope to see you sometime in the future soon. Thank you so much for your presence.
Thank you, Siddharth. Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.